The North Atlantic wind screamed across the cliffs of Cornwall like a wounded animal, salt spray rising 30 feet above the rocks below. March 1942. The lighthouse at Pendeen Watch stood defiant against the storm, its beam cutting through the darkness every 15 seconds, a heartbeat of light in a world gone mad with war. Inside the keeper's cottage, Eleanor Pascoe sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The wireless crackled with static, then a voice, German U-boat activity reported off the Scilly Isles. All coastal residents are advised. She turned it off. She'd heard enough warnings to last a lifetime. The telegram had arrived 3 months ago. Regrets to inform you. HMS Barham. Torpedoed. No survivors. Her husband Thomas had been a signalman aboard the battleship. A single torpedo from U-331 had torn through the hull, and 862 men went down with her. The Admiralty footage showed the ship rolling over, the magazine exploding in a fireball that could be seen for miles. Eleanor was 43 years old. She'd married Thomas when she was 19, had lived in this cottage for 24 years, and had learned every aspect of lighthouse keeping because Thomas believed a keeper's wife should know the work. "What if something happens to me?" he'd say, half joking. She never imagined it would be a German torpedo in the Mediterranean. The lighthouse was officially unmanned now. The ministry had automated the light after Thomas's death, installing new equipment and posting a "Do Not Interfere" notice. But Eleanor remained in the cottage, her home, paid for by Thomas's years of service. The government men came once a month to check the machinery. They treated her with polite distance, like she was furniture that came with the property. Tonight, the storm was different. Eleanor felt it in her bones. She moved to the window, pressing her face against the cold glass. The beam swept across the churning black water, illuminating whitecaps and foam. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, she thought she saw something else. A shape. Dark and low. Gone before the light returned. Her heart hammered. She grabbed Thomas's binoculars from the shelf, old bar and Stroud glasses he'd used for 20 years, and trained them on the water. The lighthouse beam came around again. Nothing. Just waves. But Eleanor had lived by the sea her entire life. She knew the difference between water and steel. The telephone line had been down for 2 days, cut by the storm. The nearest village was Pendeen, for miles away along muddy coastal roads. No motor car. No way to warn anyone. She thought of the merchant convoys that passed these waters. The Liberty ships carrying food, fuel, ammunition to Britain. The U-boats hunted them like wolves, rising from the depths to fire their torpedoes, then disappearing before the escorts could respond. In the past month, 17 ships had been sunk off Cornwall alone. The BBC didn't report the numbers anymore, bad for morale, but Eleanor heard things. Sailors washed ashore. Wreckage. Fuel oil coating the beaches. The lighthouse beam made another rotation. This time, she was certain. A conning tower. Maybe 800 yards out, riding low in the heavy seas, moving parallel to the coast. A U-boat. Hunting. Eleanor's first instinct was to douse every light in the cottage, to hide, to pray it would pass. But then she thought of Thomas, sinking in the Mediterranean while men screamed in the darkness. She thought of the merchantmen out there, unaware of the predator stalking them. She moved quickly, muscle memory taking over. In the storage room beneath the stairs, she found Thomas's old signal lamp, a portable Aldous lamp he'd kept from his Navy days. It was outdated, manually operated, with a simple trigger mechanism to open and close the shutter. She'd watched him use it 100 times, practicing Morse code signals late at night. The device was heavy, cast iron and glass, with a focusing lens 8 inches in diameter. She carried it to the window facing the sea, hands trembling not from the weight but from the absolute certainty of what she was about to do. She didn't have a plan, didn't have training, didn't have authority. But she had rage, and she had Thomas's lamp, and she had spent 24 years watching light speak across the darkness. Eleanor plugged in the lamp. The bulb glowed orange, then white. She pointed it toward where she'd seen the U-boat and pressed the trigger. The letter L. The beginning of something she couldn't take back. The wind howled. The lighthouse beam swept the water. And somewhere out in the darkness, a German submarine commander raised his periscope and saw something that would change the course of the night. Captain Lieutenant Werner Schultz lowered the periscope of U-537 and turned to his executive officer, his face illuminated by the red combat lighting of the control room. Signal lamp. Shore position. Bearing 270. The executive officer, Lieutenant Hans Krieger, frowned. Official signal, Herr Kalu? Schultz shook his head slowly. Unknown. Random patterns. Not British Naval Code. He raised the periscope again, timing his observation between the sweeps of the Pendeen lighthouse. The improvised signal came again. Short flashes, irregular intervals. Amateur. U-537 was a Type IXC-40, 176 feet of steel and diesel fuel, carrying 22 torpedoes and a crew of 48 men who hadn't seen sunlight in 19 days. They departed from Lorya on February 15th, sunk 2 freighters off Ireland, and were now hunting the shipping lanes south of Cornwall. Schultz was 29 years old, on his 4th patrol, and had learned to trust his instincts. Something about this signal felt wrong. Could be a trap, Krieger said quietly. British intelligence. Drawing us closer to shore. Schultz considered this. The British had gotten clever. Fake radio traffic. Q-ships disguised as merchants but armed with hidden guns. Signals designed to lure U-boats into ambushes. But this? This felt different. Too clumsy. Too desperate. Maintain current depth. Ahead slow. Let me think. The U-boat crept forward through the dark water, riding at periscope depth, her diesel engines silent, running on electric batteries. Above them, the storm provided perfect cover. Rough seas scattered sonar, made detection nearly impossible. But it also limited visibility, even through the periscope. The signal lamp flashed again. This time, Schultz recognized fragments. Not proper code, but letters. K, A, I, E, G, or. Then G, E, F, A, H, A. Danger. His blood went cold. Someone's trying to warn us, he said. Warn us. Krieger looked skeptical. Herr Kalu, that's impossible. No British civilian would. Unless they're not British. Schultz's mind raced. Intelligence briefings had mentioned resistance sympathizers along the coast. Irish nationals opposed to British rule. Communist activists. Even a few German expatriates who'd remained in Britain before the war. Could this be one of them? Someone trying to signal a warning about patrol boats, minefields, coastal defenses? Or was it exactly what Krieger suggested, bait in a trap? The periscope showed the coastline clearly now. The lighthouse beam. The cottage below it. The signal lamp flashing from what appeared to be a ground-floor window. No military installation. No harbor. Just rocks and storm. Herr Kalu, the convoy. Schultz had almost forgotten. Intelligence predicted a convoy would pass this area tonight. 8 freighters escorted by 2 corvettes, carrying aviation fuel and ammunition from America. That's why U-537 was here. That's why 3 other U-boats were spread along this stretch of coast, waiting for the radio signal to coordinate the attack. I need to know what that signal means, Schultz said. Bring us to within 400 meters. Slowly. Eleanor watched the dark shape grow closer. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the lamp steady. What had she been thinking? That she could frighten away a German submarine with a homemade signal? That they would see her amateur flashing and retreat? Instead, they were coming closer. She could see the conning tower more clearly now, a dark silhouette against darker water, cutting through the waves with predatory grace. The spray broke white against its hull. She could make out the profile, the jutting snout of the deck gun, the radio antenna, the periscope like a snake's eye watching. Thomas had told her about U-boats. How they hunted at night, surfaced to charge batteries, crept close to shore where sonar couldn't reach them. How their torpedoes could cross 2 miles of ocean in minutes, silent and unstoppable. She was in over her head. But stopping now meant the U-boat would proceed to hunt the convoy. Continuing meant what? She had no idea what her random signals were communicating. She'd flashed letters without thinking, fragments of words, pieces of warnings, desperate attempts to confuse or distract. Think. Eleanor. Think. If she was the submarine commander, what would she want to know? Where were the patrol boats? Where were the minefields? Where was the convoy? She could lie. The thought came suddenly, electric with possibility. She could send false information, lead them away from the shipping lanes, warn them of dangers that didn't exist. But she didn't know proper naval code, didn't know German, didn't know what signals they would believe or dismiss. Unless... Eleanor moved quickly to Thomas's desk, pulling out his old code books. He'd kept them despite regulations saying they should be destroyed or returned to the Admiralty. Sentimental value, he'd said. Now they sat before her, International Code of Signals, Royal Navy Procedures from 1939, semaphore charts, Morse protocols. She flipped pages frantically, searching. Standard warnings. Danger signals. Navigation hazards. Her finger stopped on a page. You, repeated 3 times. You are running into danger. Simple. Universal. Used by all navies. She pointed the lamp at the approaching U-boat and sent the signal. ... Then she sent coordinates, random numbers that would put the danger 10 miles north of their current position. Then she sent the letter M, mines. Through the binoculars, she saw the U-boat's conning tower. It had stopped moving. They were reading her signals. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. What had she done? If they believed her, if they turned north, she might have bought the convoy time. If they didn't believe her, if they realized she was a fraud. The lighthouse beam swept across the water. The U-boat was diving. Eleanor watched the conning tower disappear beneath the waves, the periscope sinking last, leaving only foam and darkness. Gone. Vanished as if it had never existed. Had it worked? Had she frightened them away? Or were they simply submerging to avoid detection, preparing to surface elsewhere and continue hunting? She had no way of knowing. She collapsed into Thomas's chair, the signal lamp still clutched in her hands, her entire body shaking. The storm raged outside. The lighthouse beam continued its eternal rotation. And somewhere beneath the black water, 48 German sailors were making a decision that would determine who lived and who died this night. Werner Schultz stood in the cramped control room of U-537, studying the crude map spread before him. The signal had been clear. Danger, mines, coordinates. But something gnawed at him. Surface position showed no mine-laying activity in that sector, Krieger said, reading from the intelligence logs. BDU reported the area clear as of last week. BDU, Befehlshaber der Unterseeboot. U-boat command in Lorya. Their intelligence was usually reliable, gathered from reconnaissance aircraft, intercepted British signals, and reports from other boats. If they said no mines, then no mines. But what if the British had laid a new field? How old is that intelligence? Schultz demanded. 6 days. 6 days. An eternity in war. The British could have laid 100 mines in that time. Herr Kalu, the convoy will be in range in 40 minutes. Krieger checked his watch. If we proceed north to investigate this warning, We'll miss our position." Schultz felt the weight of command like a physical thing. 48 men depended on his decisions. The Kriegsmarine expected results. Tonnage sunk, Allied logistics disrupted. But walking into a minefield would kill them all. One contact with a Mineshirtshorn and U-537 would be torn apart, sinking in seconds, the pressure hull crumpling like paper as they dropped past crushed depth. "Who sends that signal?" he asked. "A civilian. In a lighthouse cottage. In the middle of a storm. Why?" "Maybe they hate the British," Krieger offered. "Maybe they're afraid we'll shell the lighthouse. Maybe they're insane. Or maybe," Schultz thought, "they're clever." He raised the periscope one more time, scanning the cottage. The signal lamp had gone dark. Just the lighthouse beam now, sweeping eternally. No other lights. No signs of military presence. "Take us to 70 meters," he ordered. "Silent running. Course 020. We investigate the northern sector. Quickly." The diving planes tilted. The depth gauge needle swept right. U-537 descended into the safety of deep water, turning away from Pendeen Watch, away from the cottage, away from Eleanor Pascoe, away from the convoy that would pass 3 miles south in 37 minutes. Eleanor heard them before she saw them. The deep, rhythmic throb of diesel engines carried across the water, cutting through the storm. She rushed to the window, binoculars pressed to her eyes, and her breath caught. Ships. A convoy. She counted 8 silhouettes against the storm-dark horizon. Freighters, riding low and heavy with cargo, plowing through the swells in a tight formation. And flanking them, smaller and faster, the lean shapes of corvettes, escort vessels bristling with depth-charge racks and deck guns. They were passing south of Pendeen, following the coastal shipping lane, completely unaware that minutes ago a German U-boat had been hunting these exact waters. Eleanor's signal had worked. She'd driven the submarine away. Or had she? The relief lasted exactly 3 seconds before a new terror seized her. What if there were more U-boats? What if the one she'd seen was part of a wolf pack, multiple submarines coordinating an attack? What if her signals had only moved one threat while others waited? She grabbed the signal lamp again, pointed it toward the convoy, and began flashing. U-boat, U-boat, U-boat. The Aldous lamp cut across the darkness, its beam tiny compared to the lighthouse but visible to anyone watching the shore. She sent the signal again and again, desperate to warn them. On the lead corvette, HMS Bluebell, a 22-year-old signalman named Peter Davies saw the flashes. "Skipper. Shore signal. Port beam." Commander James Haskell grabbed his own binoculars. "What's the message?" "U-boat warning, sir." Repeating. Haskell's jaw tightened. "Bloody hell. Sound action stations. Signal the convoy. Emergency turn to starboard. Now." Klaxons shrieked. Men ran to battle positions. The corvettes surged forward, their engines screaming, racing to position themselves between the convoy and the threat. Behind them, the 8 freighters began a ponderous turn, their massive rudders fighting against momentum and storm. "Sonar. Give me a sweep. Full arc." In the sonar compartment, operators pressed headphones to their ears, listening through the static of storm noise for the telltale sound of propellers, motors, the metallic groan of a submarine's hull. "Contact. Bearing 345. Range 1,800 yards. Submerged target. There." Not the U-boat Eleanor had seen. That one had gone north. This was a different submarine. U-621, lurking at periscope depth, her commander having watched the convoy approach, his finger hovering over the fire button, torpedoes loaded and ready. "Target that contact. Prepare depth charges." HMS Bluebell turned hard, her bow cutting through waves, spray drenching the forward gun crew. On her stern, sailors hauled depth charges into the launching racks, 300 pounds of Torpex explosive per canister, set to detonate at 200 feet. Aboard U-621, the alarm sounded. Destroyer closing. Emergency dive. Emergency dive. The U-boat's nose pitched down, her electric motors screaming as she clawed for depth. 100 feet. 150. 200. The first depth charge hit the water above her. Eleanor watched through the binoculars as the corvette's stern erupted with splashes, 4 dark shapes tumbling into the water. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the ocean exploded. White columns of water blasted upward, towering 50 feet into the air, lit from within by the flash of detonating explosives. The shock waves spread out in perfect circles, visible even in the storm. The sound reached Eleanor a moment later, a series of crushing whumps that she felt in her chest that rattled the cottage windows. More charges. The corvette was bracketing the area, saturating the water with explosions, trying to crush the U-boat's hull or damage it enough to force it to surface. Below the surface, U-621 shuddered violently. Light bulbs shattered. Men were thrown against bulkheads. A pipe burst, spraying cold seawater into the engine room. The depth gauge needle spun wildly, flooding in the aft compartment. Seal it! Seal it! Depth 300 feet. Hull groaning. Another pattern of depth charges exploded above them, closer this time. The entire submarine rang like a bell struck by a hammer. Cork insulation fell from the ceiling in chunks. A sailor vomited from fear and concussion. Surface. We have to surface. Blow all tanks. High-pressure air screamed into the ballast tanks, forcing the water out, giving the U-boat buoyancy. She rose rapidly, out of control, rocketing toward the surface. She broke through the waves like a wounded whale, water streaming from her decks, her conning tower visible in the lighthouse beam. On HMS Bluebell, the forward gun crew was ready. Target acquired. Range 600 yards. Fire. The 4-inch gun barked, recoil slamming it backward on its mounting. The shell screamed across the water and hit U-621 just aft of the conning tower. Metal tore. Fire blossomed. The submarine lurched sideways. Fire again. Fire again. Another shell. This one struck the pressure hull, punching through steel, detonating inside. Men died instantly, shredded by shrapnel. The U-boat began to sink, bow first, her stern rising high out of the water. Some of the crew made it out. Eleanor saw tiny figures scrambling onto the tilting deck, jumping into the freezing water. Others went down with the boat, trapped in the flooding compartments, the pressure crushing them as U-621 fell into the abyss. The corvette dropped a life raft. Circled. Pulled 17 survivors from the water. 31 men drowned. 10 miles north, Werner Schultz heard the depth charge explosions through U-537's hydrophones. What was that? Detonations. Her Kalu. Multiple. Heavy. He closed his eyes. U-621. It had to be. The convoy had passed. His fellow captain had attacked. And the escorts had killed him. Because Schultz had gone north. Because Schultz had believed a signal from a cottage. "Turn us around," he said quietly. "Course 180. We're leaving. The minefield." "There is no minefield," Schultz said. "We were played. Someone on that shore wanted us away from the convoy. And it worked." Krieger stared at him. "A civilian?" "One person." "One person," Schultz confirmed. "And 31 of our men just paid the price for me believing them." U-537 turned south, away from the battle, away from Cornwall, heading for the deep Atlantic and eventually back to Lorient. Schultz would file a report about the false signal. Intelligence would add it to their files. The Kriegsmarine would be more cautious about shore signals from unknown sources. But tonight, one convoy had made it through. and one woman with a homemade lamp had changed the mathematics of war. Dawn came gray and cold. Eleanor stood on the rocks below the lighthouse, watching the tide bring in the debris. Pieces of wood, scraps of metal, a life jacket with German markings, oil slicks that shimmered rainbow colors in the weak sunlight. She hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. The image of that submarine exploding, of men jumping into freezing water, of the corvette's guns firing again and again, it played behind her eyelids every time she closed them. She'd wanted to stop them, to warn the convoy. She'd succeeded. 31 men were dead because of it. The rational part of her mind knew they were the enemy. They'd come to sink British ships, to kill British sailors, to starve Britain into submission. They'd sunk the Barham. They'd killed Thomas. This was war, and in war people died, and those men had known the risks when they climbed aboard that submarine. But the part of her that had watched them die, the human part, couldn't stop seeing their faces in her imagination. Couldn't stop wondering if they had wives, children, mothers who would receive telegrams just like she had. Regrets to inform you. The sound of an engine pulled her from her thoughts. A military lorry came bouncing down the coastal road, followed by a staff car. They parked outside the cottage, and men in Royal Navy uniforms climbed out. An officer approached, tall, thin, with a lieutenant commander's rings on his sleeve. "Mrs. Pascoe?" "Yes." "Lieutenant Commander William Ashford, Naval Intelligence." "May we have a word?" They sat in her kitchen. 5 men crowded into the small space. Ashford, 2 ratings who took notes, and 2 others who didn't identify themselves but had the careful eyes of people who asked dangerous questions for a living. "The convoy reported unusual shore signals last night," Ashford began. "From this location." "Was that you?" Eleanor's hands trembled around her teacup. "Yes." "Using what equipment?" "My husband's old signal lamp. From his Navy service." "You signaled a U-boat warning to the convoy?" "Yes." "How did you know there was a U-boat?" She told them. All of it. Seeing the submarine through the binoculars. Using the lamp to send random signals, trying to confuse or frighten it away. The false mine warning. The coordinates. Watching the U-boat dive and disappear. Ashford listened without expression. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Pascoe, do you understand what you did?" "I tried to help." "You engaged in unsanctioned military signaling. You sent false information to enemy forces. You compromised operational security. Any one of those actions could be considered." He paused. "Problematic." Eleanor met his eyes. "I watched my husband's ship get torpedoed. I wasn't going to sit in this cottage and let it happen to someone else." HMS Bluebell reported sinking a U-boat. 17 prisoners taken. They're being interrogated in Plymouth. Ashford glanced at his notes. The prisoners confirmed their submarine was part of a coordinated attack. 4 U-boats. The plan was to wait until the convoy entered the kill zone, then surface and fire simultaneously. 8 freighters would have been sunk. Perhaps 1,000 men. Eleanor felt her chest tighten. "Your signals disrupted that coordination," Ashford continued. "One submarine went north investigating your false mine warning. That broke the Wolf Pack's formation. When the convoy passed, only 1 U-boat was in position to attack. The escorts had time to respond. We lost 1 freighter, the SS Empire Howard, torpedoed and sunk before the corvettes could intervene. 32 crew. But the other 7 ships made it through. 32 British sailors dead. 31 German sailors dead. 63 men total. But 800 saved. The mathematics of war." "One of the German prisoners," Ashford said quietly, "an officer from the submarine that went north, he told our interrogators something interesting. He said his captain believed the shore signals were from a sympathizer, someone trying to warn them away from danger. He said his captain felt betrayed, angry, that a civilian had lied to him. Eleanor said nothing. Mrs. Pascoe, the Admiralty is aware of what happened. There are people, important people, who think you should be prosecuted. Unauthorized military action. Violations of the Official Secrets Act. Ashford leaned forward. But there are also people who think you saved 7 ships and 800 lives with nothing but an old lamp and extraordinary courage. What do you think? Eleanor asked. Ashford smiled slightly. I think we're going to confiscate your husband's signal lamp. I think we're going to post a guard on this lighthouse to ensure no further independent communications occur. And I think you're going to sign a document stating you will never speak of this night to anyone, ever, under penalty of imprisonment. And that's all. That's all. Officially. He stood. Unofficially? The captain of HMS Bluebell wanted me to give you this. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. To the lighthouse keeper. You saved my convoy. You saved my men. The Royal Navy thanks you. The signal was received. Captain J. Haskell, HMS Bluebell. Eleanor's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. They took Thomas's lamp. They posted 2 ratings at the lighthouse with orders to report any unusual activity. They had her sign papers that she barely read. And then they left, the lorry and the staff car bouncing back up the coastal road, disappearing into the gray morning. Eleanor stood in the cottage doorway, watching them go. The lighthouse beam had shut off with the dawn, its automated cycle complete. The storm had passed. The ocean was calm now, deceptively peaceful, hiding the wrecks beneath its surface. She thought about the German officer who'd felt betrayed. Werner Schultz, according to Ashford's notes. A submarine commander who'd believed a signal and paid for it with his mission and his fellow sailors' lives. She wondered if he hated her. She wondered if she hated herself. The weight of what she'd done would never leave her. 63 men dead. 800 saved. The mathematics worked out favorably, but mathematics didn't scream when the torpedoes hit, didn't drown in freezing water, didn't burn when the depth charges exploded. But Thomas would have understood. Thomas would have done the same thing. She turned back into the cottage, closed the door, and began the work of living with what she'd done. 3 weeks later, on April 12, 1942, a letter arrived. It bore no return address. The handwriting was precise, European. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message in broken English. To the lighthouse lady. I am sailor from U, 621. You warn convoy. We die. But you save British sailors too. War is war. You do your duty. We do ours. Someday maybe no war. Maybe we drink tea and talk about light on water and stupid signals and men who die for governments that forget them. Until then, we are enemies. But I am alive because corvette pull me from water. 17 of us alive. This is more than nothing. Thank you for the warning, even if it kill my friends. At least convoy know we were there. At least they fight back. Better than torpedo in the dark with no chance. Prisoner of war is better than dead. The ocean remembers everything. The light too. F. Hartmann, Matrose, Kriegsmarine. Eleanor read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the box where she kept Thomas's medals, his service photographs, his final letter home. That night, she sat at the window where she'd operated the lamp. The lighthouse beam swept the water as it always did. 15 seconds of light. 15 seconds of darkness. The eternal rhythm of warning and guidance. She thought about signals. About light crossing water. About messages sent and received, understood and misunderstood. about the terrible power of communication in the dark. Somewhere out in the Atlantic, Werner Schultz was hunting again. Somewhere in a POW camp in England, Friedrich Hartmann was waiting out the war. Somewhere beneath the waves, the Barham and U-621 rested in permanent darkness. And here, in a cottage in Cornwall, Eleanor Pascoe lived with the knowledge that one night, with a homemade lamp and desperate courage, she had changed the outcome of a battle. She hadn't won the war, but she'd saved 800 lives and lost 63. The mathematics would never add up cleanly. War didn't work that way. But the light had spoken, and someone had listened. And that, she thought as the beam swept past her window once more, would have to be enough.